I've been coaching for 5 years. So yeah, I've been a coach since 2021 and coached about a little bit over 400 people by now. But you should be in a pursuit to learn so much that you are so informed that you stand out from the crowd. Because ultimately, you will drown out in this industry, quote unquote. They kind of deserve it.
Yeah.
I personally think like you should have the mental capacity to realize at a decent age that these things are detrimental. You should think for yourself. I shouldn't be the one to tell some kid that, hey, critical thinking is important. They get a bad rep because people are fucking stupid and no one wants to watch educational content. They just want to watch 3 second clips. And that's why people do it, right? But again, when I was 14, I wasn't thinking about injecting fucking needles in my ass. I
Yeah.
will tell you this, there's more to life than bodybuilding, as cliche as that sounds, because when you're young, your objective is how can I pick something? How can I pick a sport? How can I pick something as a hobby that I can essentially turn into something absurdly competitive? But again, it's just not a good mix. You have to be willing to have a very mature mindset going into this and be willing to accept risks and be very, very informed to the point where you can internalize it, right?
Hey, so this is me after editing the entire video, and I want to thank you guys for all the support within the past few months, and especially in the past few weeks. It has been life changing, and the Arnold Classic is tomorrow. I'm flying out tomorrow and getting there tomorrow night. So if you see me there, talk to me. But this is not the sort of content that I normally do. Akib is a very smart person, a lot smarter than I am, and I wanted to see his perspective on some things. So I asked him to hop on call with me, and he was very generous with his time. So if you guys give him a follow or check his stuff out, please do. And just sort of put this video on in the background when you're doing cardio or when you're driving, or just skip through timestamps, whatever you want to do. But thank you guys for watching. All right,
Let me know when you want to start.
all right. So what was your first cycle, and how'd you approach it?
My first cycle was actually starting off with the typical 250 mgs of test and then titrating up slowly over time up to 500 mgs of test. And then later down in the cycle, I added in 300 mgs of primo. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people will have different approaches. There's really no wrong answers, but the clear winner is, do you have the money? Because cycles are entirely about affordability. What the correct cycle is entirely about affordability. Can you afford the ancillaries? Can you afford blood work, right? And when I say that, I mean comprehensive, every couple of weeks, right? So for me, I was a broke college student, but I still at the time but I still managed to put in whatever I could into it. And I would typically get blood work every 8 weeks. And this was not like absurdly comprehensive.
Yeah.
This was through Merrick Health, but I still got like the necessary panel. So that included CMP, CBC, CRP, um, SHBG, testosterone, free and total LCMS, estradiol ultrasensitive, prolactin, PSA, iron panel, and so on, right? There's so many of these panels available and they give you so many different insights. And when you start, you want to have, and this is precisely what I did. I essentially had a very, very comprehensive panel at the very beginning. And most people will advise you against that, saying that, hey, it's not necessary. But here's the thing. When you start out, before you even start the cycle, that should be the most comprehensive panel you ever get. You want to see how much things change from your baseline when you have androgenic anabolic steroids added in, especially because you don't know your genetic response, right? Some people may respond with poor liver function, poor kidney function, whatever it may be. But the point is, you're at least able to trace that it was specifically the gear's interaction itself. Now, it may not be the gear itself. For example, testosterone may not affect your liver enzymes as much. However, it could have led you to taking certain ancillaries, which were necessary, right? Which in turn could have affected your liver enzymes or potentially other factors in play, right? And you understand this very well yourself, right? When you're using anabolics, they tend to raise your LDL slightly, HDL decrease, right? There's like so many different markers, ApoB, LPA. Well, LPA doesn't change, but when you have these changes, we need to look at things in context. So when we don't have a lot of these baseline metrics that are super comprehensive to look at, we're not able to determine whether it was a natural genetic response that you already had, because most people will not get that when you go through a doctor, and they go through private insurance, or rather insurance. They're not going to prescribe you 90% of those panels. They're going to prescribe you the basics: CBC, CMP, lipid panel. That's it, right? Now, when you're trying to start your first cycle, you're looking at 18 to 20 panels. And I'm being dead serious, right? It can be less. It's entirely about affordability. And then ancillaries is another thing. Do you have the sources? We both use, we might use India, but like a lot of people use domestic sources where they use anabolic pharmacists. What is it? Belgius? A bunch of other sources that are quote unquote trustworthy. That depends on what you deem to be trustworthy. I know certain sources have a drop off and fall off, and others, have a come up where they have better testing, etc. Now the issue comes into play where if you can't find the right sources, you're going to be spending even more. And then now you're cramming in a budget where you're thinking about what else should I get? How often can I get that? So
Yeah.
my approach essentially was start at 250 tests, slowly titrate up to like 350 tests, check my E2, check all the markers that are relevant, that I checked before. And then now I'm basically checking what elevated from 250 to 350 mgs of test and looking at those specific panels. Now, once I've done that, I already have a clear understanding. So I know DHTs will obviously impact lipids, but also your prostate potentially and other markers. And I know that your testosterone will also, or any androgens will affect the amount of free or binding iron, right? There's more iron that's free. So yeah, with that being said, I'll check those, and then I'll check that group of markers that happens to be potentially bad. If there's none that's bad, I'm going to do that again. So I'll jump up to 450, right? For me personally, I noticed that I aromatase a lot when I was younger because I had a bit more body fat. So of course, I needed to retest constantly after I reduced my body fat at the same dosages. Right now, I don't aromatize at all at 250. Before, I did heavily. So yeah, there's like key differences lying there. I just like getting specific markers, and I did enjoy getting markers every couple of weeks where essentially I was checking the most in-depth possible solution or in-depth possible marker that gave me insight as to what the test or the primo had affected. Now, with that being said, like I'm not just going to check that. By the end of the cycle, obviously, I need to go through a little health phase. And, people will push you towards the direction of, oh, that's pussy. You don't need all that, right? My opinion is you want your first cycle not to be conservative, because that I believe having a first cycle be conservative is a complete waste. I don't think a person should be conservative in their first cycle. I believe they should go all in, but with the condition that they're able to get consistent data, because
Yeah.
data is everything. If you're able to get as much data as possible, you're able to get everything. You're able to set yourself up for the next several cycles instead of you having to playing guessing game and then get more blood work, less consistent, right? And it also allows you to like quickly see how much fluid intake, electrolyte intake, your ancillaries, your other over-the-counter supplements affect your blood work overall, and your blood pressure, blood glucose, resting heart rate, how much sleep you get, right? You start to dial in a lot of these things, and it gives you a proper understanding of why people say get yourself dialed in as a natural first before you jump into a cycle. And the point of that is simply, you're going to realize how much it actually impacts your health as far as being on steroids go.
I think people around my age or even like college students, they want to cheap out as much as possible, and they fail to realize that the first cycle or two is to collect as much data as possible. And I think
Yeah.
when I did the super draw and DHB stuff, I got a lot of backlash because people thought I was just throwing stuff out there without any testing. I got blood work done every 3 weeks during that time frame, so I got blood work done 5 times within the span of a few months, a few weeks actually. I have data from every single like titration upwards, every variable that was added, how much water I drank the day before the test and the day of the test. So it was just a time of collecting as much data as possible, which is
Yeah.
more expensive. But like kids don't realize that, or people my age don't realize that it is very expensive. And cheaping out on the blood test is going to prevent you from having prolonged cycles in the future, because you are going to
Yeah.
encounter these issues whenever you have like high hematocrit randomly, or you realize you have gyno because you didn't take the repercussions to find your right ratio
Yeah.
for yourself.
Yeah. That makes complete sense, man. I don't understand why people are so against collecting that data. People want fast results. But the thing is, imagine what more you could take. Imagine how much trend you could take, testosterone you could take. Imagine how much superdraw, EQ you could take if you actually collected the data. That way you'd feel healthy. You wouldn't feel anxious. You wouldn't feel like you're turning gay or something else, right? Exactly, right? Like you wouldn't know any of these things unless you got the blood work. You'd be able to have a viable way of titrating up and down instead of having to completely pull everything out, right?
Yeah.
When you have that data available to you, now you know, instead of me going from, let's say you're very responsive or rather very sensitive to trend, right? Instead of going from 100 to 150 mgs of trend, you're going to maybe slightly decrease the amount to 75 mgs because that's like your sweet spot because you had that data. You know your lipids were on point. You know your heart rate was on point. You know your blood pressure was on point, etc. Right? Yeah, pretty much.
Um, so with the sourcing things, do you think the predominance with people like promoting steroids and promoting the gray market on TikTok is going to have like a more like long-term effect on these kids, especially with recent testing with testosterone nete having a ethyl oleate?
Oh yeah. Okay. Personally, I don't think people. If I'm being honest, right? Most people aren't doing what you're doing. Most people are not filtering, right? They're just gonna get shit off China. And then I've actually just onboarded a client that happened to get gear from his coach that sold it to him for 3x or 4x or 5x of the no, sorry, 3x of the original price that he got it for from China. And I could tell because it was unlabeled in a vial of, the fucking 10 packs.
Yeah.
Now, it's really shitty because you don't know what solvents they're using. You don't know what carrier oil it is. You don't know any of that, and they're very discreet about it. You don't know how it was sanitized or anything like that. You don't know the entire process. And a lot of these Chinese labs, they're very shady in the sense that they don't manufacture. A lot of these people think that these gray markets are different. It's the stupidest shit I've ever heard, right? These gray markets are not different at all. And what I mean is, yes, you have different prices. You have all these telegrams, right? None of that matters. Where do you think it comes from? They're not the manufacturers. The people that white label in the US are the middleman who happen to be the middleman of the middleman that have direct access to the manufacturers. And guess where all of that comes from? The peptides and the gear. There's like three manufacturers in
Yeah.
China, three main ones that produce all of this, and they're also shady. So now when people do COA tests and all that, right, or like purity tests, if there's any metals, if there's any impurities, right, they can't really confirm that it's even good in every batch just by testing one vial, right? So it's kind of the risk you're taking at the end of the day, whether it's with peptides or this. I personally am willing to take the risk with certain things, right? Not others. Um, but yeah, they're all manufactured from three main manufacturers, and then they're distributed across these wholesalers, or rather the gray market. Um, so you can imagine that all these people are constantly trading around all this, making themselves think that, oh, I have the source, I have the holy grail, right? You can go on Finric right now, right? And it'll tell you the exact lab results or the purity tests, the COAs of specific labs and which one has the highest grade for specific peptides, for example. Um, yeah, that gives you a clearer picture, but at the same time, you can never confirm it, right? If it's like a 90% accuracy of their purity being like perfect, that's good. That's a good indicator. But otherwise, it's a little odd. You can't just like blindly trust that, hey, this source is perfect, that source is perfect. You don't know. They all come from similar places, and unless you're willing to test every vial, and again, it defeats the purpose. Unless you're willing to test every single vial, you should not think about, constantly buying everything and taking everything as safe, right? The concept behind buying all this gear is in my head, hey, if I'm gonna buy gear, right, like you do, as far as like filtering, right? I want to make sure I filter things, right? I want to make sure that I am, aside from getting it from reputable sources, I want to make sure I filter things. I want to make sure that the COAs come back clean. But at the same time, for like, let's say peptides, I want to make sure that I get the more popular ones that are already in demand, but they already have a large supply. And the pure reason being is that, things are going to get very faked. If you got something like, I don't know, some really rare
DHB,
peptide,
DHB,
huh?
DHB.
DHB, right? DHB or even parabolin, right? You're probably going to get some fake shit. You're going to get some fake shit because not that many people want it, but at the same time, there's not that much supply circulating around.
Yeah.
So you can imagine it's probably not the safest route to get it from China, right? You'd rather pay a bit more, get it from reputable sources domestically, purely because it allows you to get that assurance that, hey, these are all their US customers, and maybe they're a bit more transparent. Even if they white label, at the very least, you know, it allows you to get a better understanding that, hey, on average, all their customers did not have a negative experience on average, right? So, yeah.
And even with the janoshik testing, like people don't realize that purity isn't everything. The
Oh yeah,
GLPs
yeah,
that
100%
janoshik,
it's not.
like 1.5
Yeah,
percent ethyl oleate is a lot for something as
yeah,
simple as testosterone and ethate. And yes,
yeah.
you can take the risk if you don't care, and people can tolerate it. I've tolerated upwards to like 50% ethyl oleate, and but to say that this source is good just because it is like 100% concentration, it doesn't make sense because
Exactly.
there's so much more testing to it, and each test is like $200 to like 120, and it adds up. One test could go up towards to like $600, and they're not willing to pay
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I mean, again, like it's either you go that route or you don't question it in the sense that unless you're willing to pay that $600 or $500, whatever it may be for your batch of gear where you ship off one vial or even peptides, just don't think about the fact that, hey, is this source good? Is this source good? No, you have to do it yourself. Otherwise, you sort of have to blindly trust it on the basis of other reviews. Because again, like you said, you don't know because purity does not mean shit, right? It's only a small part of the equation. You need to look at the chemical composition. You need to look at, um, the actual toxins, metals. I guess that's part of purity, but you get the idea, right? Um, you need to get an overall picture because a lot of things can go wrong. It's a fucking lab at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not. This is not me trying to fearmonger gray market because that's what people have been calling me out for. It's the big awareness because people are not aware that these things are happening and think that this source is the same as it just buying from a pharmacy.
Mhm.
And okay, do you think with the younger use the PDs being used at a younger age could be a good thing because you are more resilient when you're younger, right? So then you could leverage a higher dose in your younger years, and then you wouldn't have to push that dose higher in your like late 20s or early 30s because at that time you aren't as resilient as you are in your early 20s or even teens.
Resilient in what sense?
Like obviously when you are in your like late 30s, you're not gonna handle
Yeah.
be able to handle like trend the same amount as
Yeah.
you are in your early 20s. Um,
Mhm.
it might be marginal, but it's still going to be a factor. But the same conversation could lead to people thinking that 12-year-olds should start taking steroids.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can see that. Like everything's arbitrary at the end of the day. There's no, like the cliche saying, there's no right answer. But at the end of the day, it's not just about that. Most kids are not willing to go as far as you, right? In terms of hell, I don't even see grown ass men doing that, right? Um, they're not willing to filter things. They're not willing to get the lab COAs. They're not willing to get all their sources checked thoroughly, right? Instead of buying off a regular site. They're not willing to get a coach or anything like that. It depends. Again, that's up to people. It's like there's so many factors involved, and if they're not willing to do that, they're risking a lot of things because they don't know what they're going into it for, right? You have to have a clear mindset when going into this because I will tell you this, there's more to life than bodybuilding, as cliche as that sounds, because when you're young, your objective is how can I pick something? How can I pick a sport? How can I pick something as a hobby that I can essentially turn into something absurdly competitive? Whether that's bodybuilding, D1 sports, trying to get into the leagues, it is what it is. So when you look at it that way, now you're kind of accepting the risk. You know exactly what goes into it to a certain degree. You know what happens to people in that specific field. So you have to be willing to accept those risks. So you can't just, one day come up to your partner and be like, "Hey, I took testosterone and all this at the age of 15. And that caused a slowdown of my brain development. And not only that, that also caused issues with my fertility and my DHT production, which is why, maybe I have issues with growth. Maybe I might have closed my growth plates a little too early because I had too much estradiol conversion because I was not willing to get blood work, right? There's so many factors involved that people don't think about when they're young. And again, like your case may be different. Vast majority of people should not, purely in the sense that they're too stupid to understand what goes into this. And it's not about like them absorbing that information. It's almost always about the arrogance of someone that's young because they will oftentimes go out of their way and do something either stupid or something that's risky. And that's fine. That's just human nature at the end of the day when you're young. But again, it's just not a good mix. You have to be willing to have a very mature mindset going into this and be willing to accept risks and be very, very informed to the point where you can internalize it, right? Maybe I'm sure you think about all that, right? But others may not, right?
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of kids go fucking hypogonadal because they happened to hop on SARMs when they were 16, 17, and they never somehow never thought, hey, let me get my blood work done. It's very rare, but again, it can happen, right? Just because there's like a 95% success rate where people didn't have issues after PCT doesn't mean that's going to be you, right? It's like you can take those risks, but you have to be willing to understand the risks prior. You can't just be surprised going into it.
Yeah. Well, actually, that brings this question that I was about to ask you. Because people are hooked on at a very young age, it is going to affect their brain development to an extent. And with the predominance of AI, I think that as these people get older, their brains are going to, sort of deteriorate because they had lack stimulation. And you're seeing this even the guys in their late 40s now who like blasted 19 doors and they can't really form coherent sentences because they
Really?
sort of just
Yeah.
like lifted weights and didn't really stimulate their brain. And I think with people of my age being heavily reliant on AI, it is going to be significantly worse when they get into their late 40s or even early 30s.
Um, in my personal opinion, it really depends, right?
Yeah.
I think you're better off using AI than not in this current day and age because things are evolving quick, right? I'm not gonna go into like I'm gonna keep this relevant to
Yeah.
like more so the lifting side of things. But in a sense, we had the tech bubble. That people called it a bubble, and people thought it would burst so badly that majority of people's portfolios would collapse to the ground and they'd never recover from it. And now the AI bubble. Now the AI bubble is a little different, right? It's a little different from the traditional Silicon Valley route because in this specific context, now what's happening is you have something like OpenAI, Nvidia, and Oracle all having sort of trade deals or agreements where they're practically passing around the same funds to each other and raising their own valuation. So if I give you $500 million worth of, let's say, GPUs, but I give you just the GPUs and assets, now in return, you give me, let's say you're Oracle, you give me storage space. Essentially, you're using my data centers, right? 500 $300 million worth. Now both of our valuations raised, right? So it's a little bit hyperinflated in so many different contexts where five companies control the entire market. Now, this is going to make sense in a bit, but during this current day and age, it is very important that you keep up because there's so many different evolving technologies surrounding AI that if you aren't able to keep up, not only will you get left behind, but you will be looked at as a sort of social outcast in a sense because so many things are so relevant to it, right? AI, I believe, does increase the rate of learning, right? It increases the information, or rather, not just information, disinformation and misinformation. We understand that, right? Because LLMs are fed with things that are already existing, whether that's corpus through different types of corpus, fucking Reddit, bunch of things, right? And of course, it can have inaccuracies, but to say that it's like worsening your brain in the sense that people are just too reliant on it really depends person to person. I think it is natural selection, in my opinion. And as funny as that sounds, I think it's natural selection. It's about as natural selective as the kid that started smoking cigarettes at the age of 16 back in the 50s, right?
Yeah.
They started seeing issues. They didn't know what they were doing going into it. Um, Eventually, some of them got lung cancer, right? I'm not like trying to make like a direct parallel, but it's in the same facet where if people are over reliant on AI to the point where not only are they not learning and relying on it heavily and like not using other platforms, not using different LLMs, not knowing exactly what use cases there are, not knowing how to build things with the LLMs, not doing things for themselves with the help of the LLMs, then they're effectively putting themselves in a position where it's like you having your mom constantly cook you food, constantly do your dishes all your life. And then suddenly one day you just get out the house and you have to live on your own.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? You have no skill sets and you're ultimately not going to be able to face reality. It's in the same facet where personally believe it's a good thing. And if things like that happen, aside, even kids, right, to some degree, I would say like older kids, I think if they're so over reliant on it, they kind of deserve it.
Yeah.
I personally think like you should have the mental capacity to realize at a decent age that these things are detrimental. You should think for yourself. I shouldn't be the one to tell some kid that, hey, critical thinking is important. Don't try to cheat on everything,
Yeah.
right? Teachers are saying that forever, right? Yeah, there's so many different facets to life. And honestly, if people are fucking up, they're fucking up. It's not for us to tell them, hey, you're going to ruin your life. Because you tell that to one person and there's five more kids relying on AI. 15 more, right? And so on. It'll never stop. You just have to push a certain narrative, in a sense. And, restricting it isn't the correct way. I would say informing it,
Yeah.
informing them at a large quantity is the right way. And if they're not willing to listen, then so be it.
That's the whole thing. People don't want me to talk about using PEDs because they think I'm gonna influence people to hop on. But I think if you're influenced by someone else on Instagram to start using exogenous hormones, you sort of deserve to ruin your health.
I fully agree. I fully agree. I have fucking dumbasses. I will tell you this. I have retards coming to me telling me, hey, I saw this other influencer running this. Yo, VAR for the Huz. Should I take retatrutide? Meanwhile, they're fucking 50% body fat. They don't know what the fuck they're doing. They've never touched a chicken and rice meal. They've only ate fucking Takis, some bullshit garbage, ice cream, whatever it is. They've never been on point. And then suddenly you want to try some miracle drug, but then you also give the same advice to your friend. Let's assume that you're not a fucking bum. You give the same advice to your friend about something else. Hey, don't try to skip through a relationship too fast. Take it slow, right? Why don't you take that same principle and apply it back, right? If you're able to apply that to someone else, maybe take your own advice and apply it to other facets of life. Maybe don't try to take the shortcut. And if you do, that's you. That's all you. And if you all only want to listen to IG influencers and whatever it is, that they're not even promoting themselves, right? They get a bad rep because people are fucking stupid and no one wants to watch educational content. They just want to watch 3 second clips, and that's why people do it, right? So if they're listening to that, that's on them. Um, you know, there's a reason why the pharmaceutical industry exists, right? Because people are fucking stupid. Well, not in that sense, but like a
Yeah.
large portion of it is that people are so fucking stupid that they go down different routes, going through unhealthy routes, and a lot of them selectively do it to the point where they make up a large market share of the pharmacies,
Yeah.
pharmaceuticals that are prescribed.
I think not to put myself like above others, but a lot of people are very emotionally immature, and then they see that someone like Clav is like glorifying testosterone, and as soon as they go through a breakup, they want to hop on, and then they hop on and realize that they're not ready for it yet, and then after a few weeks they just hop off, and then they feel horrible for months, and I'm seeing this like time and time again. People around me, people on social media, just decide to hop on because of a relationship or because they get into this school, and they're just not ready mentally to alter these hormones and also not take the precautions. And I
Yeah.
think that people like Clive are really making a bad impact on these kids.
You know what's crazy? Um, I actually disagree to some extent. To some extent,
Yeah,
I agree, but like specifically with Clap, right? I think people are misconstruing it because they look at these little like minute clips, right? People don't understand. This is a fucking kid that turned 19 and immediately went famous practically overnight. Turned 20. Now people are looking at him like as if he's spent 20 years of experience promoting drugs to kids. He does do that bullshit, but it's the fact that that's the only thing that actually works, and it's super degenerate, right? But at the end of the day, you got people are fueling the fire, right? So if they're willing to listen to that advice from a 19, 20-year-old fucking streamer, that is natural selection.
yeah,
You deserve every wrongdoing that happens to you based off what you selectively take from his advice, right? I personally don't think I've ever looked at a streamer or taken a streamer so seriously and said, "Yeah, I'm gonna try meth." And he doesn't even take meth, right? He takes a variant of amphetamine for ADHD, right? Same concepts, right? People take it so seriously, and then they start taking his political views, not just the geared political views, and apply it to the real world. This is a fucking 20-year-old kick stream. What are you saying, right? Like, he knows some of his things, but it's like, why are people taking him so? He's an entertainer first. That's why he blew up because education does not sell,
yeah,
right? And that is their fault. They purposely watch it and they choose to listen to it. So I think that being impressionable is honestly a wrongdoing of the parents, not parents or maybe education system or someone else or maybe themselves not being properly learned or not being properly taught the right things in the right facet to where they're able to actually apply it to real life. And instead they decide to go out and listen to a fucking streamer about advice that could potentially harm them for the next 50 years.
yeah. Like I recently just had a someone like sign up for consultation, and he came to me like crying because he was allergic to MCT oil, and he thought he was gonna die. But then like because he just hopped on, he was like 14 years old in the UK because it's very prominent in UK to just have roids anywhere. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, yeah, because you can
It's
get it straight imported from Turkey or some shit. I don't know.
Yeah, and he said his plan was to do testosterone and Anavar because he saw it on TikTok. It's just it's crazy.
You know, I blame the parents.
Yeah,
You know why? I worked when I was 14, but what job did you have when you were 14? I personally had a job, but like for like only a small short period. What job did you have when you were 14?
bro. I
What
mean,
about 50?
I mean, I've seen in Greg Doucette's video talking about how I just took my parents' money to buy all the gear and everything
That's
else.
fine. You know your
But
shit. I'm not saying
I thought it
I'm
was
not saying
like people because it's
but,
happening so often. Like because
but
people are
I'm
trying to
saying
find ways to not use crypto and or not use other ways to buy stuff because they're still heavily financially reliant on their parents.
right? So that's one aspect. At least you're doing it smart, right? But the people that, that who follow Darwinism and end up actually harming themselves, right? Where do they get that money? Their parents, right?
Yeah,
So if that's the case, how the fuck are they and getting enough money to be able to purchase testosterone, Anavar on the web, choosing to ignore that advice, right? I'm very adamant about this. I know he's 14, but again, when I was 14, I wasn't thinking about injecting fucking needles in my ass.
yeah,
Were you?
yeah. I was.
You were?
I was 13. I wasn't in a gym yet. I was researching all the like the testosterone and everything else when I was 13 before I
Yeah.
actually in the gym. I have
Yeah.
binders of all the studies I was reading.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, why? I'm so confused.
I just thought it's
Okay,
interesting. I
at
thought it was
least you
interesting
learned.
to push like past like the super physiological levels in
Okay.
like any aspect.
Did
So
you? Yeah, that's my question to you. Did you want to start it then and there, or did you
I
want to learn more?
I knew I wanted to learn more and experiment it with myself or you know learn more about it.
Okay. Okay. Right. To each their own.
Yeah,
But like, proves my point. You. weren't thinking about sticking a needle in your ass.
Yeah, not then and
And
there.
literally right then there
I
at the
just
age of
thought
14.
I was gonna plan to do it whenever I was older, like a lot older. But
Yeah.
I got into an accident, so I just sort of decide
Hmm.
why not.
Yeah. I was scared to take fucking pills, regular medication. I thought taking too much ibuprofen would kill me,
Yeah,
right? It's not reasonable, but like at the same time, I'm not in that environment. Maybe in that sense, there's some insecurities with those kids to where like they want to start it right then and there. That's something that needs to be addressed at a bigger level, right?
yeah,
Maybe that's bullying. Maybe that's something else, right? Maybe they feel like they're not enough. It's not to do with social media. It's not to do with social media because social media is only a factor. Yes, they spend a lot of time on it, but at the end of the day, they're raised around fucking people. They're going to school around people. They're probably influenced to some degree where they feel like they're less in person and they feel like they could achieve higher status in person. Because again, they're still with their age groups, right? 16, 17,
yeah,
15, 14. So why even do it, right? If you're going to be around that age group, you have to feel some form of insecurity or something else to where you don't feel like you're enough to be able to just do it right then and there. In other contexts, right? I still don't think it's okay. That's your choosing, right? But like at least in the context of bodybuilding where you choose to take it, you know the risk and you know that it's not for some, I guess, not materialism. What would be
vanity,
the right word?
vanity,
Huh?
vanity.
Yeah, it would not be out of vanity, right? Um, Technically, yes, people can say that, but I say that as more so as a competitive sport, right? People do it out of that. At least that's more reasonable because it's like you're literally willing to take whatever you can to get to that point. Maybe you shouldn't start young, but at least it's better, right? There's levels to it, right?
Yeah,
These are the fucking retards. These are better. And then these groups are a lot smarter in the sense that they understand that their brains may develop like over time, but at the same time, they know that, they'll have different mindsets going into this. They don't know if they're willing to pin testosterone for life. They don't know any of that. They don't know if they want to have kids. They can still always like if there's 1,000 people or actually 100 people pitting testosterone, even five of those people may not return get their fertility back ever, right? If you're willing to take that risk and you understand that, sure. But like they don't. These kids do not. That's the point. So
yeah. Mm, all right, moving away from PDs. With the prominence of like GLP-1s or
mhm.
GLP-3s, like a hereditary side, what do you think
Yeah,
about them like overall?
I think it's a great drug. I think it's great. Again, going back to my same point, natural selection. And actually, in this specific case, in adults, it's actually not natural selection. It's just malpractice, in my opinion. Um, what happened to the participants in the phase 2 and 3 clinical trials of retatrutide and semaglutide? A large percentage dropped out because they couldn't eat. A large percentage also could not properly retain mass. A lot of them also had things like gastroparesis, pancreatitis, right? A small percentage, but it's still a small percentage. And guess what? We can apply that. If they're fucking obese, what do you expect? You suddenly expect them to eat healthy? No, I mean, like, come on. Like, if they're being prescribed by the doctor for this bullshit, then I personally believe that's one, obviously the adult's fault for not doing research, but two, the doctor's fault for constantly prescribing them, right? I actually talked to a mom of an old client, and she was telling me she's on 12 mgs of tirzepatide, right?
Yeah,
I'm like, what the fuck? 12 milligrams? I don't even cross 4 milligrams myself, right? And that's like very later down the line. I don't even use it to suppress my appetite. I use it so that I can personally eat properly in a sense where I get the food noise blocked out and I can straight up look at chicken and rice, salmon, other fish, lean meats, different things that are like perfectly macro balanced to where I can control every single macro and I can look at it and be like, this is the most delicious shit ever, because I have less dopaministic urges, or rather that signaling because of the GLP-1 mechanism, right?
yeah,
So in that sense, it doesn't really make sense to me because it's like you have doctors that are constantly prescribing them things upon things upon things. I think it's good. It's just that they're also going to face a lot of backlash and have lawsuits, just like Eli Lilly already had with semaglutide. But again, what do you expect when you are prescribing it to a general population that once again wants to clearly die or something because they just take things and I never understood this. If you're a person, right, and you're taking supplements, you're taking drugs, right? Wouldn't you think that maybe you record how you feel or like record what you have on that, and then instead of waiting weeks and then like recording only one thing and like telling the doc, hey, I felt like shit. I had stomach issues. What is he gonna do with that information at the same time, right? So it's the doctor's fault and their fault for not giving the right amount of information. What context can you give for the doctors to actually provide useful information? Think about like you coaching someone. Imagine you told them, hey, take 250 mgs of test, right? Hypothetical situation. And you're like, get blood work, get blood pressure, get blood work, blood pressure, resting heart rate, all that stuff. And they just come back with, hey, I feel a little watery. What do you do with that information? That's exactly what majority that's exactly what majority of GLP-1 users are like, right? There's a reason why there's so many issues because they're too fucking stupid to think, hey, maybe I should not fucking eat Takis. Maybe I should not eat all this garbage. Maybe I should not eat curry like constantly left and right. Maybe I should eat healthier, right?
Yeah.
So like I have like a very deterministic viewpoint where I think a lot of people deserve what they're getting. I think people are misinformed, and I also think that a lot of doctors should lose their license because they're doing more harm than good. And I'll get into that in a bit.
Um. Okay. I think. Do you think they're actually applicable in like a long or off-term season? Like I.
Ooh, yeah. So that really depends, right? I think they are. I think they are. I actually tested this out on several clients. I'll have them use a microdosed amount of
Well, see, that's exactly the point. People don't think like 500 micrograms is gonna do anything.
what?
Like people think that
I
you need.
start with 250 micrograms.
Yeah, people are going towards like 1 to 2 to 3 milligrams first and going upwards.
Like I said, natural selection. Let them do whatever they want. That's
Yeah,
stupid. The
dude.
whole point is you
I have
microdose
friends who
it.
compete like or like third college nationals who use like
Yeah.
less than a milligram and they literally could not eat.
Yeah.
They said it was too much.
Dude. Dude, me too. Me too. Me
Yeah,
too. I don't know how people need so much. When people tell me 8 milligrams, I'm like, what the
yeah.
fuck?
I know
But
people
yeah,
in real life, like literally down the street over there, using 10 milligrams a week,
no,
and
I know. Me
it's
too. Me too. It's a big industry now.
yeah,
Actually, what's funny is we'll get back into this conversation, but what's funny is insulin is finally going to be a lot cheaper and there's going to be more access
yeah,
because what happened was there's been a shortage because Eli Lilly or a bunch of these companies, Novartis, whatever it is, they stopped selling insulin. They stopped producing insulin
yeah,
because they shifted towards GLP-1s, which is good in a sense, right? Because now people are able to, or companies are able to sell them and compete with each other instead of having competition with just a monopoly or I guess, uh, kind of a monopolistic competition,
yeah,
and instead shifting towards a bunch of these smaller companies going into a rat's race, which I think is good and needed because people can now finally afford it. And for you to actually get your name out there, brand out there, you need to actually be able to put it at an affordable price, right? There's that. But getting back into the actual conversation itself, I think using that much GLP-1 is fucking stupid, right? Retatrutide, whatever it may be. I personally prefer retatrutide because one, we're using the mechanism where we have more insulin secretion of the pancreas from the pancreas. So in turn, we are able to literally regulate blood glucose, right? Insulin's one thing, yes, that's good, but at least in this case, people that are not very educated on the idea of insulin and its use in practical application for bodybuilding will actually be able to use this properly if they microdose it to where one they can regulate their blood glucose and push carbs a bit more, and if their carbs to grow get a bit out of hand, they can at least use the increased insulin secretion to regulate that increase in blood sugar to some degree, right? Again, there's so many other variables in play, and the second thing is, and I think this is really huge, right? It's the concept where if we have less dopaministic urges, right? because of the GLP-1 mechanism, that in turn leads us to less addictions. So possibly you quitting nicotine, right? You quitting Zins, all that stuff. And then also possibility of you actually sticking to plan, because the biggest part about a bulk that people fuck up on is just nutrition. If they
Yeah.
could literally stick to the same boring meals and enjoy it, which is what I personally find in the GLP-1, like a rare true time, then they can absolutely successfully perfect the bulk. That's if you microdose it.
Yeah.
But on the other side, the latter, you end up with gas issues, gastric issues, um, food backed up, constantly feeling like shit, poor nutrient partitioning, um, and then you just don't end up absorbing a lot of that food. There's so many issues with that where it's like, why the fuck did you do that? That was like the whole point. You should avoid it. That's why we microdose it. So I mean, that crowd can just fuck off. Like I don't even want anything to do with that. I think they deserve it. I think
Yeah.
they deserve it.
Like there are people that use like a lot of retatrutide, and they're
Yeah,
slowing down their gastric emptying to the point where their guts are distended, like
yeah,
24/7. And it's like
yeah,
you're creating yourself like you're gonna look worse on stage if they decide to step on stage. Like your waist is gonna be so wide because it's gonna
yeah,
be extended 24/7. Like genuinely, I see them
yeah,
at school. I see them at the gym. They have distended waists because they don't understand like just how to properly you know plan your meals out.
yeah.
Um,
Stupidest thing ever.
when would you remove GLP-1 in the client for contest prep to avoid issues with gastric emptying?
Oh, what's funny is I actually have a client that's just on peptides.
Really?
Right. Yeah. And he's just on peptides, no gear. He's going to NPC untested. I'm purposely doing it to get him the most condition possible. And I'm trying to do a trial on this. He's about 7 weeks or 8 weeks out. I'm not gonna touch anything. Like in terms of changing dosages, yes,
Yeah.
but we're modulating water, fluids, fluid, sodium, food, obviously, cardio, all that stuff. Modulating a bit of the dosages, the frequency, whether we switch to IM or sub Q based on how much fat he has left, right? All those little details, yes, they can go into account. But I also think about like all the mechanisms of action, how they interact with each other, right? In the context of, and again, I'll get back into this, but in the context of SS31 and MOTS-C, they're both AMPK activators,
Yeah.
right? They will also improve insulin sensitivity, right? This guy's blood glucose is fucking low, but again, in the context where he's like 8% body fat, it makes sense. Um, so I'm literally able to push his carbs. And again, you have to be very careful about this because when you activate AMPK, right, you sort of divert, I guess, some neural drive, not neural drive, but rather some attention away from something like mTOR, right, which is needed for hypertrophy.
Yeah.
So we don't want activation of something like AMPK. We want to ensure that we are driving signaling through mTOR. And that's another factor. But when we use something like SS31, MOTS-C, Retatrutide, and all that, right? In the grand scheme of things, when you're going deeper into prep, assuming you're not fat at the beginning, I kept him very shredded. He's like 8% body fat, and he's 9 weeks out, right? 8 9 weeks out.
Yeah.
So because I have him at that point, I'm literally able to push his calories. He's only like 125 pounds, but he's shredded, right? His calories are sitting at 2,300 right now. Cardio at 40 minutes, and he's getting leaner. I got so scared because I thought he was losing too much fat too
Yeah.
quickly because show is too far out. So he's literally sitting at 2,300 calories on training days, no issues, just constantly pushing carbs because he's able to actually regulate it because he has a decent amount of insulin, but also the amount of efficiency from the insulin, the partitioning of those carbs is a lot more efficient. So his body's just burning through that food. And that's a good thing because now he has more glycogen towards his workouts, towards cardio, right? So I think it's very applicable. I think it's super underutilized. You just have to very carefully understand the mechanisms and interactions with everything against each other. He's tracking his blood pressure, blood glucose, fluid intake, literally everything. This guy's on point, right? If you can do that, awesome, right? And then as far as GLP-1 goes, here's the kicker. People are stupid unless like some other case. I don't think if there's no gut issues or anything like that, I personally don't think you should be getting off anything. If you ran it the entire prep, why would you get off peak week or even 2 weeks prior to the show? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
That adds another layer of variable when in reality we literally use it to suppress your appetite, improve insulin sensitivity. Now we take that away. Now you're more likely to binge. Yes, control's there, but when we relied it on the entire prep, now you're changing another variable so quickly you can't monitor those changes. You can't like make quick changes to where he's going to get back on track. That's not going to happen. So the best thing to do, in my opinion, just keep them in. Adjust the dosages, adjust the food, play around with it, get more data. As you collect more data, you're
Yeah,
able
that's
to
why
affect.
you want to get ready for show early, so you can play around with the carbs, like different carb protocols. So then
Wait,
at the
say that again.
so that's why you want to get like a PO for show earlier in time, so you can play with different protocols.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah,
So
right.
you don't have to like just guess. Oh, I'm gonna take out RETA and add in carbs and hope for the
Yeah,
best, because that's what people are
yeah,
doing because they're not getting ready for show early.
yeah. And you know what's crazy? He's like just going back to the same guy. He's lean, but he's on 4 milligrams right now,
Yeah,
and this is 9 weeks out. But he's still hungry on it.
yeah,
I want him to be that way. That's a good thing,
yeah,
right? That's a good sign that he's going to be able to take in all those carbs and probably not going to have a backed up gut because we don't want that. If we can slowly titrate up to 0.25 mgs every week or like, little bit 0.25 mgs every 2 weeks, whatever it is, to the point where it's such minimal change in the amount of appetite that we're effectively improving the insulin sensitivity, just like keeping it stable, then by the end of the prep, as soon as we carb up, he will blow the fuck up. I could probably push like 500 grams of carbs, right? For him,
yeah.
I probably could at like 125 pounds, and he would have no issues just burning through that food.
So with the conversation of MOTS-C, do you think using MOTS-C in the off season for to stay lean would be counterproductive to build muscle?
I think it's counterproductive. I'll actually show you something. I'll bring this up. So one thing people don't understand is, you know, activation of AMPK somewhat causes inhibition of mTOR.
Yeah,
What is mTOR needed for? Building muscle, hypertrophy, especially during a workout. And when you take MOTS-C, when you're in a very sensitive state, or rather a fasting state, where you're very insulin sensitive. So as soon as you get out of bed, and that's when you have the highest energy. So you typically want to work out around then, or like maybe after. But like the point still applies, unless you wait till the half life ends, right? It's probably not the smartest idea, in my opinion. Like I think we should wait and like people should like do some trial runs bit by bit and like not fully commit to it and see like what the growth difference is.
yeah,
Maybe it's not significant enough. But again, like in my eyes, I see it as one, potential inhibition of mTOR, which can honestly lead to less muscle growth, but at the same time, we have better insulin sensitivity and potentially because it works within our biology, it won't completely inhibit mTOR and it might actually not override it at all, and it won't be enough. And let's say you're using PEDs in your case, it would like the PEDs themselves would override the effects of the mTOR inhibition, right? So there's that.
yeah. I saw it on Now Niga's podcast recently, the one he posted
Wait,
yesterday.
who?
Now Niga, is it one of the
Oh, no, no, he was
yeah,
talking about the.
he was
No.
had a podcast with like a peptide company that he's with.
Mm,
Yeah, and they
yeah,
mentioned it, and it's not something that I even thought about, but it's not really talked about too.
yeah. It's a very like this is what I mean. Like people like just throw around these things,
Yeah,
and they don't have enough experience to be able to like confidently do these things. If
yeah,
you don't understand like the pharmacokinetics and like the general rule of thumb, general understandings of how to bulk properly and how to go about it, it's probably not the smartest idea. Maybe like lower your expectations and then use that. Fine, right? It's not going to be that bad. It's not going to be bad, and just go through a test run. And if it doesn't work out, then you do more tests. Bang, you're good.
yeah,
But like in the case that it does work out, good. But at least you lowered your expectations to where now you didn't fully commit to the bulk itself thinking you gain the most amount of muscle possible, right? Especially as like a natural. I still consider peptide users to be natural,
yeah.
um, despite what WADA says. Fuck WADA.
I've been seeing on Instagram a lot of coaches saying that GLP-1s will eventually replace fat burners like clenbuterol. Do you think that'll ever be a time where clen isn't used in contest prep?
Yes, I think GLP-1s are already. I think all these no GLP-1. I hope you know. By the way, um, if you can afford it, SLUPP, let's say I think it's like 100 milligrams, right?
Yeah,
That is absurdly expensive, right? That is 100 times I guess, the 100 times the clinical dosage for the rats in the rat study.
yeah,
And that's absurd, but it would be equivalent to, let's say, I would maybe like 20 to 40 micrograms of Clen with less side effects.
yeah,
A bit on a pharmacokinetic understanding, it would probably be less less harmful than Clen, because Clen does increase your NEAT simply by increasing the amount of jitters, your heart rate, and all that.
yeah,
So potentially you could face less issues. So again, like in conjunction, you could use something like MOTS-C, and something that people don't bring up enough, which I don't understand. I thought that was like the whole point. If you have something like SS31 and AMP and like other AMPK activators like MOTS-C, you have the ability to activate AMPK, bind to the cardiolipid. SS31 keeps the actual structural integrity of the membrane of the mitochondria intact. Now, if that's the case, then when it goes through metabolic stress or mitochondrial stress, now it's preventing the cellular death, or rather the death of these mitochondria, and keeping them intact while also adding in something like glutathione to reduce the oxidative stress that on top of the production of reactive oxygen species. Now when we have that glutathione to reduce the reactive oxygen species on top of the SS31, we're pretty much priming ourselves to be in the least stress state. And then now we also add in MOTS-C, which also activates AMPK, but then at the same time, it increases the output or the throughput of the actual mitochondria, or rather the ATP production. Now, if we have both, what do we know about increased ATP production? Your metabolism goes through the roof, right? Like you're going to burn more calories. So in that context, you're going to end up losing more weight because it does increase your need. Think about it. Like it will increase you if you are extremely energetic. More than likely, it's going to increase your need. We need energy to be able to power the actual mitochondria, right? Because that's where it's produced. So yeah, there's that. But yeah, I think in specific context, I think Clen can be used. I just think more people should stay away from that, and it should only be used at a high level, specifically because you have no reason to rush when you're
yeah.
in
Like
the amateur league.
I think it's only
You should
applicable
start
in
out very lean.
the higher stages of bodybuilding because they have such small like timelines between shows.
Exactly, right? So
Yeah,
that's the only context.
I think like people are rushing towards like Clen T3 T4 DNP. They work very well, but there's just
Yeah,
so
of
many
course, yeah. For
other
good reason.
effects that comes with it. Like why not just take a few more weeks to diet down and just slow down a little bit and then prolong your cycle or prolong the shows you could do. You could run two more shows, one more show afterwards, and then collect more data. But instead, you're running towards using Clen and doing one show and then eating a lot of food afterwards and just ruining your entire off season.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't understand it. I don't understand it. You're getting to the same goal. You're just gonna end up feeling shittier if you take the Clen DMP just because you wanted to speed it up,
Yeah,
and then because of that, you will also likely rebound really badly
yeah,
versus if you took it a little bit slower. Then you end up getting into a worse spot versus the other guy because if you got there first, right? Now the other guy gets there a few weeks later, but he's still been leaner
yeah,
within that same period. Now, in between those two people, there's like let's say 4 weeks, 4 to 5 weeks apart. In those 5 weeks, that guy that took the shortcut more than likely is gonna get fat within those 5 weeks,
yeah.
and then he's gonna feel like shit, then diet back down. Right? Doesn't make sense.
And then with the like prolong, I think people need to realize, sort of, you know, having a conservative approach to cycles can be very beneficial because then you can have a prolonged cycle, but not
Yeah.
to the extent where you are using very small amounts of androgens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm seeing
Actually, my
people
first. Yeah.
I'm seeing people
Go on.
try to use orals like very early on in their cycle, like because I use Superdraw, right? And I posted about it a lot. People are coming towards me, telling me about their cycle and how they're starting with like 4 weeks of Superdraw, which is insane. 4 weeks would like destroy me, and at the start of the cycle, so they're just building up the amount of stress in their body, and then eventually they'll probably have to cut down the cycle to like 12 weeks to 10 weeks
Yeah.
because they added a Superdraw so early on because they thought that it would speed up the process.
Dude, like, I actually have a slightly different philosophy. So I do agree with you on the aspect of gear length and like dosages, prolonging it. And there's some debates up for it, but I actually have always carried this because of Victor Black, right? And the concept kind of is it's not your first cycle, it's actually your first four cycles, right? I would say maybe five technically because of shortages, but within your first five cycles, think about it like this: testosterone, GH, they're both bioidentical hormones. We have the most research on them, and more than likely, they will have the least impact. Now, we add in secondaries, right? When we add in secondaries, typically we do not want to choose it from the same derivative, right? Maybe first cycle is just test. Second cycle, we want to choose it from a different derivative. So, like MPP, right? And then we test it out, whatever. Next cycle, we'll try out mass. Next cycle, primo, or I don't remember if it's mass or if it's ano. Yeah, I would say yeah, mass. Yeah, personally speaking, maybe like fifth cycle, EQ, right? Now you have like five cycles designed around. It can be short, right? I think this is good data collection if you can perfect it, and it allows you to essentially understand what you're most reactive to, what your best response is, because people are going to be genetically different, and these are primarily the drugs that have the least, I guess, binding affinity to, let's say, something like SHBG or other markers that can cause other downregulatory issues. So now, if we have all these tests, now we're able to effectively learn what works best for us, what works best for me, what works best for me, and then what caused the least amount of issues. Now we can take all that data, sum it up, and essentially get that collection and be able to tell exactly what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to collecting as much data as possible. Like that's the
Yeah.
whole thing. Like you want to spend the
Yeah.
first like year, 2 years, 3 years, just collect as much
Yeah.
data. But you're not able to collect data if you don't know how to actually track your potassium, sodium, water intake, blood pressure. Like there are people
Yeah.
running grams of gear that I know who don't even have a monitor, which is they're $20. Like why not buy them?
Yeah. This is fucking interesting.
I think I don't know.
I made that mistake. I'll be honest. Like I've made mistakes like that before.
Yeah, I'm
I
not.
was stupid for that.
I've done
I,
some
I'm
things.
admittedly very stupid for that.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I've done things that I have been pretty stupid with gear, and like,
learn pretty quick though.
yeah, you learn from it. But then people
Yeah.
just think that it's okay because you're using gear anyways. Why
Yeah.
not you know
Yeah.
risk more health, which
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. All right, man.
Right.
Appreciate the call. Let
I
me
just
know.
want anything people want to know about you or background.
I've been coaching for 5 years. So yeah, I've been a coach since 2021, and I've coached about a little bit over 400 people by now. And it's been like a decent chunk of them have been long-term clients, but the perspective I take is, and this is just me as a person, and this doesn't describe you, but if you're going to be in a pursuit of helping people in this aspect or something else, and it's not just about the money, obviously, right? But you should be in a pursuit to learn so much that you are so informed that you stand out from the crowd. Because ultimately, you will drown out in this industry, quote unquote, this bullshit industry. So ultimately, if you're not willing to go down every route, please don't do it. You're doing more harm than good, and you're building distrust within people overall for fitness coaches. I think fitness coaching used to be amazing. It's full of bodybuilders, people that actually knew what they were doing, and then it evolved to a bunch of fucking dickheads that only offered fucking basic nutrition, basic training advice, no background, nothing, no experience. I coached the first 75 people for free, right? So there's like levels to this, and I hate it when people are charging fucking $500. I get it. You're confident. You're great at sales. I can sell that too, but that's not the point. The point is long-term growth, right? I can scale to that point, but you end up burning out. You aren't able to do it for years on end. Not only do you hate it, but you don't know exactly how to navigate and prevent the churn. So then you end up having to get 50 new clients instead of keeping at least like 50 to 70% of your old clients, right? It's fucking stupid. Um, and the other thing, also should have mentioned, I'm a CS student. I just graduated. So I'm a full-time coach and a software engineer. Yeah. That's pretty much it.
Oh, so where can people find you on TikTok or Instagram?
People can find me on TikTok, Akib underscore MA, and then my second TikTok is Akib underscore MA2. I mostly use the MA2 one. And then my IG is Akib M Coaching. Yeah.